Hello friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Wolfman in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Wolfman. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you. I also going to give you all the information on which OTT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, starcasters' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the ends, so let's start the video. Wolfman is a 2025 American horror film directed by Whannell from a screenplay he co-wrote with Corbett. A reboot of The Wolfman 1941, the film stars Christopher Abbott, Julia Garner, and Sam Jaeger. The plot follows a family man seeking to protect his wife and daughter from a werewolf, only to become infected and slowly transform into the creature. Blum produces alongside his Blumhouse Productions banner. The film was announced in mid-2014 and was to be part of the Dark Universe, a shared cinematic universe centered on the Universal monsters. Aaron Guzikowski and David Callahan were attached to write the script. After the failure of The Mummy, 2017, Universal shifted its focus to standalone films. The success of Whannell's The Invisible Man, 2020, rekindled Universal's interest in the Monsters franchise. They accepted a pitch by Ryan Gosling, who was also set to star, for a new Wolfman film with Derek Cianfrance to direct. However, Cianfrance left the project in late 2023, and Gosling dropped out of the role, remaining as executive producer, while Whannell took over as director with a new cast. Principal photography occurred in New Zealand in early 2024. Wolfman was released in the United States by Universal Pictures on January 17, 2025. The film received mixed reviews from critics and has grossed $17.3 million. Plot: in 1995, a hiker's vanishing in the remote mountains of Oregon sparks speculation about a virus linked to the region's wildlife. During a hunting trip in the area, a young Blake Lovell and his stern father Grady spot a mysterious humanoid creature lurking in the forest and hide in an elevated hunting blind. 30 years later, Blake lives in San Francisco with his daughter Ginger and workaholic wife Charlotte. Like his now estranged father, he struggles to control his temper, causing a strain on his marriage. One day, he receives a death certificate for Grady, who went missing, and the keys to his childhood home. He decides to vacation there in an attempt to repair his relationship with Charlotte. Seeking directions, they encounter a local, Derek, who leads them to the house as the sun sets. Before they arrive, a creature drives them off the road, scratches Blake's arm, and drags Derek away. Blake frantically leads his family to the house, turning on the generator and barricading the entrance to protect them from the monster outside. With his arm bloody and infected, Blake starts to show signs of illness, losing teeth, sweating profusely, and experiencing noise sensitivity. Hearing the creature, he puts his ear to a side door, only for the monster to grab his foot through the pet door and injure him further before Charlotte stops it by hitting it with a hammer. Charlotte grows increasingly worried as Blake loses some motor functions and his ability to speak and understand her. His hair starts to fall out, as do more teeth and fingernails, with fangs and claws growing out, and his vision becomes distorted. Fur grows on his body, and to fight the pain in his arm, Blake gnaws on it like an animal, frightening her. She spots a rundown car outside and manages to jumpstart it. Before the family can drive away, the creature smashes the windshield, forcing them to seek shelter atop a greenhouse. Blake signals Charlotte to take Ginger back to the house and runs in the opposite direction to make the monster follow him. Moments later, a limping and more deformed Blake returns. He vomits a severed finger and menacingly approaches Charlotte, scaring her and Ginger. Realizing the danger he puts them in, he prepares to leave, but the creature finds its way in and attacks them. Blake puts himself between the monster and his family, and in the struggle, he bites the creature's neck and kills it. Recognizing a tattoo on its arm, Blake realizes the monster is his infected father. He runs outside, the final stages of his werewolf transformation taking hold. Unable to control himself, he attacks his family, who flee to a nearby barn. Blake claws his way in, using his newfound night vision to sneak towards them in the dark, but is caught by a bear trap that Charlotte laid down. He chews off his ensnared foot and continues pursuing as Charlotte and Ginger flee to the surrounding forest and hide in a hunting blind as the sun rises. Blake climbs up, and Charlotte points a rifle at him. Realizing Blake is in pain and wants to die, the family shares a final look as Blake lunges and Charlotte fatally shoots him. They comfort a dying Blake before walking out of the forest, taking in the beauty of a valley he once described seeing as a child. Cast Christopher Abbott as Blake Lovell, Zac Chandler as young Blake Lovell, Julia Garner as Charlotte Lovell, Blake's wife, Matilda Firth as Ginger Lovell, Blake and Charlotte's daughter, Sam Jaeger as Grady Lovell, Blake's estranged father, Ben Prendergast as the werewolf, Benedict Hardy as Derek, Leigh Whannell as Dan. Production, development. In July 2014, Universal Pictures announced its plan for a shared cinematic franchise, later dubbed Dark Universe, centered on their Universal Monsters library, which was to include the Wolfman. In November 2014, Aaron Guzikowski was confirmed to be writing the reboot of Universal's The Wolfman. In June 2016, Deadline Hollywood reported on rumors that Dwayne Johnson was considered for the titular role. In October, David Callahan was hired to rewrite the script. In 2017, The Mummy was released as the first film in the Dark Universe. Its launch was both a critical and commercial failure and resulted in Universal deciding to shift its focus on individual storytelling and move away from the shared universe concept with the cancellation of The Wolfman and other films in development. Reporter Justin Kroll said the critical and commercial success of Leigh Whannell's The Invisible Man for Universal scrapped the universe concept and loosened restrictions for the talent in front and behind the camera, allowing them to decide how they wanted to execute their films in terms of budget and MPAA rating and invite big-name talent to pitch their ideas. By early 2020, Universal had been hearing project ideas for a year and a half from filmmakers seeking to develop characters in the franchise. These meetings included Ryan Gosling's pitch to remake The Wolfman and star in it, with Lauren Schuker Blum and Rebecca Angelo writing a screenplay described as tonally similar to Nightcrawler, 2014. Around this time, makeup artist Mike Marino molded an early version of the werewolf. Several filmmakers were considered to direct, including Corey Finley, whose film Thoroughbreds 2017 was reportedly well-liked by Universal, and Whannell, who was advised by Jason Blum of Blumhouse Productions, producer of several of his projects, including The Invisible Man, to reconsider after initially declining. In February 2020, Whannell had mentioned his interest in making a werewolf film during a press interview for The Invisible Man. In July 2020, Whannell entered negotiations to write a film treatment and direct. He and his wife, Corbett Tuck, co-wrote the first draft of their version by pulling from the feeling of confinement and isolation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic to touch on the inevitability of illness and death, setting the story primarily in one location to make the drama intimate and drawing from themes of parenting and marriage. The disease that the main character contracts in the film is meant to resemble neurodegenerative diseases like ALS, which killed a close friend of Whannell's. A deleted scene involved Blake's ALS-stricken mother. Pre-production. After Whannell left the project due to scheduling conflicts, Derek Cianfrance entered negotiations to write and direct in October 2021, having directed Gosling in Blue Valentine, 2010, and The Place Beyond the Pines, 2012. The film was officially greenlit around the conclusion of the 2023 Hollywood strikes. In December 2023, Cianfrance and Gosling were reported to have exited the project due to scheduling conflicts, with Whannell returning to take over directing the screenplay he co-wrote with Tuck, while Cianfrance received off-screen additional literary material credit. Gosling, who retained an executive producer credit, was replaced by Christopher Abbott in the lead role. Abbott was the first actor Whannell approached for the role over Zoom, being familiar with his work. The next day, Whannell saw Abbott perform the off-Broadway play Danny and the Deep Blue Sea, 2023, opposite Aubrey Plaza at the Lucille Lortel Theater in the West Village of Manhattan, while in crutches due to a shattered kneecap, which sealed his decision to cast him. During pre-production, Whannell hosted weekly film screenings for his crew in a theater inside the studio where the film was shot, with selections such as The Shining, 1980, The Thing, 1982, The Fly, 1986, Little Children, 2006, Blue Valentine, 2010, Amour, 2012, and Under the Skin, 2013. In 2024, Julia Garner, Sam Jaeger, and Matilda Firth joined the cast, 25-26. 27. Wolfman was the third project between Abbott and Garner, after Martha Marcy May Marlene, 2011, and a fifth season episode of Girls, 2016. To prepare for the role, Abbott watched hours of animal videos on YouTube to grasp the wolf's body language. Garner interviewed working mothers about societal pressures put on women and suggested that her character go through the 7 stages of grief over the course of the film, which takes place over one night after reading books on grief and loss. Filming. Principal photography began on March 17, 2024, with New Zealand standing in for Oregon. Forest scenes were shot in the South Island's Queenstown, while sets for the farmstead, the house, barn, and greenhouse were built inside Wellington's Lane Street Studios in the North Island, with Upper Hutt as the production's base camp. The house's exterior was constructed on a nearby farm in Mangaroa. Ruby Mathers was the production designer, 22. Whannell and director of photography Stefan Duccio, their third film after Upgrade and The Invisible Man, were influenced by cinematographer Roger Deakins' grounded approach to Prisoners, 2013, and Sicario, 2015. Light shifts to convey change in character perspectives were accomplished practically on set by manually adjusting the lights. The moving truck that drives off a cliff had to be imported from the United States to have the driver's seat on the left. The special effects team took 6 days to dismantle, lighten, and reassemble it onto a custom support frame. The work had to be completed without welding, cutting, or grinding because of a fire ban resulting from a dry spell in the area. A 50-foot Technocrane was used for the greenhouse sequence. 15-17. Arjun Tweeton and Pamela Goldammer were the prosthetics and special makeup effects designer and key artist, respectively. Whannell compiled a list of werewolf designs, such as those portrayed by Lon Chaney Jr. in the original The Wolfman, 1941, and David Naughton in An American Werewolf in London, 1981, and those included in The Howling, 1981, and Dog Soldiers, 2002, before settling on one. He was inspired by Heath Ledger's take on the Joker in forming an original design for an established character. Whannell went with Tweeton's first design of the werewolf, which Tweeton first showed him by making a life-sized model. Applying the prosthetics on Abbott took 2.5 to 7.5 hours, depending on the stage of the transformation. Post-production. Vocal distortion to convey Blake's diminishing ability to understand the human language was done by layering the dialogue on top of it in reverse. Composer Benjamin Wallfish and editor Andy Canny, who both worked on The Invisible Man, returned for Wolfman. Like The Invisible Man, the score was recorded at Air Studios in London. For the final piece, Goodbye, which plays during the film's ending, Whannell asked Wallfish, who had initially written something kind of spare and haunting for the scene, to compose a track for the film to end on a big emotional note, inspired by the closer, denouement, for the soundtrack of The Invisible Man. Sound mixing was completed at Warner Bros. Studios Burbank. Visual effects were employed for the character's increasingly animalistic perspective to add haze, computer-generated insects, translucent skin to reveal veins, and flashing eyes with retroreflective highlights. 15. The film cost $25 million to produce. Marketing. In August 2024, during Universal's Halloween Horror Nights in Orlando, a booth revealed the film's logo and teaser image, and on September 4th, an actor took the stage for a photo op performing as the film's werewolf. The werewolf design, a creature with a balding head, long white hair on the back of his head and as facial hair, long bony fingers, and sharp teeth, drew divisive reactions from online users and journalists. On September 6th, Universal released a teaser trailer, poster, and synopsis. Hannah Shaw Williams of Slash Films suggested that the timing of the teaser's release was damage control over the poorly received werewolf design, noting the absence of the titular creature in the teaser. Whannell described the design reveal as a debacle, as Universal did it without discussing it with him or the film's makeup artist, Arjun Tweeton. He unsuccessfully tried stopping it by calling Jason Blum, and later retorted that it was like judging the Freddy Krueger makeup by a costume at Spirit Halloween. Social media analytics firm RelishMix reported that online marketing led to 136.5 million interactions, 50% behind the average for a wide horror release. Summarizing word of mouth from audiences, it wrote, "Mixed, negative-leaning chatter on Wolfman finds some viewers taking umbrage with the look of the film, from the cinematography to the design of the titular creature." Release Wolfman was released in the United States by Universal Pictures on January 17, 2025, including engagements in IMAX, 4DX, ScreenX, and D-Box. It was previously scheduled to be released on October 25, 2024. The film's Hollywood premiere at the TCL Chinese Theater on January 7th was canceled because of the Palisades fire. Reception. Box office. As of January 20th, 2025, Wolfman has grossed $12.5 million in the United States and Canada and $4.8 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $17.3 million. In the United States and Canada, Wolfman was released alongside One of Them Days and was projected to gross $15 to $21 million from 3,354 theaters in its opening four-day MLK weekend. Variety said the wildfires in Los Angeles were not expected to affect the film's box office performance, and that audience reception would determine its success. The film made $4.5 million on its first day, including an estimated $1.4 million from Thursday night previews. It went on to debut to $10.6 million in its opening weekend, and a total of $12 million over the four-day frame, coming below projections and finishing third at the box office behind One of Them Days and holdover Mufasa: The Lion King in its fifth weekend. Deadline. Hollywood noted that the opening was less than the $17.9 million opening for Wolf in 1994, unadjusted for inflation. IMAX and premium large format screens accounted for 41% of the opening box office, and exit polling indicated that 50% of attendees who saw the film went because of the genre. Critical response. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 52% of 179 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 5.7/10. The website's consensus reads, "Director Leigh Whannell's attempt at bringing a fresh psychological dimension to the Wolfman comes at the expense of proper scares, although fans of body horror will still find some tasty morsels to chew on." Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 51 out of 100, based on 45 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore give an average grade of C on an A+ to F scale, while those surveyed by PostTrack gave it a 54% overall positive score, with a very low 34% saying they would definitely recommend it. Positive reviews came from The Hollywood Reporter, criticizing the dialogue but praising the performances and tension. The Chicago Tribune described the film as offering a crafty, patient, and deceptively good first half, but a plodding second. NME gave it 4 stars out of 5, writing that despite an unconvincing creature design and heavy-handed themes, the film has energetic pacing and delivers intense, claustrophobic action sequences. Rolling Stone opined that the film ambitiously blends body horror and familial trauma with allegorical weight, but while it delivers gripping moments and good performances, it ultimately falls short with familiar horror tropes and uneven execution. In a more mixed review, Time Out called it an atmospheric and occasionally unsettling exploration of fatherhood and transformation that, despite Abbott's best efforts and effective body horror moments, lacked the emotional depth and scares needed to elevate it to the level of its influences like The Fly. Vulture was critical of Whannell's decision to make the movie about the transformation. They described the film as visually striking but underdeveloped, with suspenseful set pieces but shallow characterizations and an underwhelming exploration of its themes, leaving it feeling incomplete and emotionally weightless. IndieWire labeled Wolfman a missed opportunity, blending what they called a promising premise about parental fears with an underwhelming execution marked by unconvincing special effects, a lack of genuine tension, and a muddled exploration of its themes, succumbing to predictable storytelling and uninspired horror elements, despite Whannell's attempts to bring a grounded emotional core to the classic monster. The Associated Press lambasted the film as a sluggish, underwhelming reboot that squandered its classic monster premise with muddled themes, uninspired scares, and a lack of emotional or narrative depth, rating it 0 out of 4 stars. Reviews Leigh Whannell connected with critics and audiences with 2020's excellent The Invisible Man, an effective reimagining of the classic Universal Monsters character. He returns 5 years later with a similar stab at an oft-told tale in Wolfman, an attempt to drag this classic movie monster to its primal roots. Sadly, Whannell and his team never figured out how to break this story, delivering a film that's half-hearted when it shows any pulse at all. A movie that's almost obsessively underdone on every level, from its low lighting, to its subdued emotions, to its lack of character depth. Wolfman is one of those movies that exists in the space between bad and good, never offensively awful enough to qualify as a complete waste of time, but falling short in so many individual elements that it dissipates from memory almost while you're watching it. After the success of The Invisible Man, Universal nearly worked on a version of Wolfman with Ryan Gosling, directed by his collaborator Derek Cianfrance, Blue Valentine, The Place Beyond the Pines. It's hard to say what that version would have been, but Cianfrance's focus on masculine roles and fatherhood feels foundational to this one right from the beginning, as a father, Sam Jaeger spouts hunter theory about the dangers of the world while walking the woods with his son Blake. After a well-shot encounter in a deer blind with something that doesn't seem human, Wolfman jumps forward decades to introduce us to an adult Blake, Christopher Abbott, now headed back to Dad's cabin to clear it out after his estranged pop was declared dead. Blake is a writer and stay-at-home father to the charming Ginger, Matilda Firth, and, of course, struggling a bit in his marriage to his wife Charlotte, Julia Garner, whose unbelievably thin character details include talking on the phone as she comes in to see her family and looking happier with colleagues than her husband. One of the fatal flaws of Whannell and Tuck's script is how remarkably little they give their cast to play with in terms of character. I don't mind a brutal, efficient piece of storytelling that prioritizes plot over person, but it's disheartening to see a talented performer like Garner look visibly adrift, unsure of what or even who she's playing. The problems start before our family even gets back to the cabin, crashing in the woods after a poorly shot jump scare with a wolf-like figure in the road. Before you know it, Blake has been scratched by Mr. Wolf, and the trio has been chased by it to what looks like the only house for miles, that happens to be Dad's. As they figure out how to stop the threat outside, the threat inside continues to grow, because, as anyone who has ever seen a movie knows, Blake is about to turn. Whannell is clearly having his most fun as a director on this set, concocting and executing Blake's transformation, a gruesome series of shots of body horror images like nails falling off and teeth doing grisly things designed to make viewers recoil in horror. Can Ginger and Charlotte save themselves from Blake? Whannell and cinematographer Stefan Duccio's confident grip on the visual language of The Invisible Man dissipates here, resulting in a film that's more consistently frustrating than frightening. It's underlit to an almost comical degree, and even the moments that should be scary lack the geography needed to increase tension. Every time the film bursts into anything approaching horror or action, the filmmaking collapses in the moment, such as in a werewolf-on-werewolf fight that should be a film highlight, but is so choppily edited and clumsily shot that it makes no impact at all. It feels like a lot of Wolfman was rushed, perhaps a victim of a rushed production after the strikes, resulting in a film that often feels more like an obligation than a passion project. It doesn't help that Whannell and Tuck consistently give up on expressing any sort of thematic depth. Whereas Invisible Man inspired debate over its themes, Wolfman introduces ideas like familial trauma and gender roles only to go absolutely nowhere with them. They're window dressing on a window that's too dirty to see through. Again, not every movie needs to make a statement, but it's an aspect of the film that wants to have it both ways, flirting with meaning only to run in the other direction when it's time to commit, or actually say something. It has so little to inspire conversation that I joked at the end that it was a cautionary tale about the mental and physical toll of being an unemployed writer. There's something primal in all of us, just not in this movie. Directed by Leigh Whannell, starring Christopher Abbott, Julia Garner, Matilda Firth, Sam Jaeger, Ben Prendergast, Benedict Hardy, Zac Chandler, Beatrice Romelli, and Milo Cawthorn. A family at a remote farmhouse is attacked by an unseen animal, but as the night stretches on, the father begins to transform into something unrecognizable. While Father Grady, Sam Jaeger, and young son Blake, played by Christopher Abbott as an adult following the prologue, are hunting in the Oregon woods, his wisdom is that dying is the easiest thing to do, seemingly toughening his boy up mentally and physically to be prepared for anything life throws at him. That's also a piece of philosophy from the toxic masculinity playbook, with Grady also obsessed with hunting down a man rumored to have contracted a disease resulting in animalistic characteristics, which perhaps isn't surprising for a film titled Wolfman. Charlotte agrees to the trip, and the family drives a moving van through Oregon's wilderness to get to Blake's childhood home. On the way there, Blake swerves to avoid hitting what looks like a man in the middle of the road and crashes. While trying to get his family to safety, a strange creature attacks him and slices his arm clean open. He doesn't know it yet, but the wolf man that attacked him infected him. The rest of the movie focuses on Blake's slow transformation into a monster and his family trying to get him help. At the same time, Charlotte has no choice but to protect Ginger from her own father. Fans of The Invisible Man had high hopes for Wolfman. After the phenomenal response to The Invisible Man, moviegoers believed that Leigh Whannell would breathe new life into the previously abandoned dark universe. Unfortunately, Wolfman hasn't quite lived up to the expectations. It's not that Wolfman is a bad movie per se, it's that Wolfman is an extremely safe movie. It doesn't attempt to do anything new or exciting. It's an extremely basic plot about a man getting infected by a werewolf and slowly turning into one himself. Wolfman tries to rely on the emotional turmoil of Blake's wife and daughter being helpless to stop Blake's transformation. While it's a sad story, there's nothing that keeps the audience on the edge of their seat. There aren't any shocking plot twists, and, more importantly, there's no hope. Blake is infected, and there's nothing that can save him from turning into a monster. From the moment the film confirms he's been infected, the movie only has one of two ways it can play out. Either Blake is going to kill his family, or Charlotte and Ginger are going to escape, leaving them without their husband and father. Plenty of real people have been trapped in relationships with someone just like Adrian. An egotistical man with enough charm to convince everyone of his innocence is more terrifying than any fictional monster. A werewolf might be scary to watch on screen, but Adrian Griffin will linger with the audience long after the credits roll, because people like Adrian do exist. Unfortunately, a fictional creature that horror fans have seen 100 times over will never hold a candle to a monster like Adrian. It's been said that all monster movies fit into at least one of three categories. Werewolf movies play on the notion that within every man lives a beast waiting to be unleashed. Vampire films tap into our collective fear of the unknown, which can encompass everything from the threat of disease to the perception of strangers as potential predators. And Frankenstein stories explore the risks when man plays God, creating life and facing the consequences. Blumhouse's shrewd 2020 reboot of the classic Universal horror film The Invisible Man cleverly played off the latter too, as Elizabeth Moss embodied a woman trying to escape an abusive relationship with a mad scientist. Directed by Whannell, the low-budget thriller was so successful that Universal rushed to adapt other titles from its classic monsters catalog, imagining a Dark Universe series that would update and eventually connect them all. Somewhere along the way, the momentum stalled, and what had first been floated as a Ryan Gosling-led reinvention of Wolfman now arrives in a slow, soulful, and not especially scary form, starring Christopher Abbott in the title role. Whannell stepped into helm after Gosling and director Derek Cianfrance left the project. In various ways, Abbott may actually be a more interesting candidate to play a man wrestling with his inner anger, as the actor, who has gravitated to tortured characters in such twisted projects as James White, Piercing, and Possessor, conveys deep wells of rage behind his dark, brooding eyes. As Blake Lovell in Wolfman, Abbott is a decent guy and devoted dad, though he's clearly worried about a temper that flares up from time to time. At one point, apologizing to his daughter, Ginger, Matilda Firth, for scaring her, he comes right out and says, "Sometimes when you're a daddy, you're so afraid of your kids getting scars that you become the thing that scars them." It's an astute line, well suited to a sensitive generation's more self-aware approach to parenting. And yet, it so blatantly articulates the film's big idea that it might have been nice to let audiences reach that conclusion on their own. The screenplay, which bears the mark of both Whannell and insidious writer Corbett Tuck, opens with a memory from Blake's childhood 3 decades earlier. The boy, played by Zac Chandler, a good match for Abbott, was raised in a sylvan mountain farmhouse by a traumatically stern father, Grady, Sam Jaeger, who takes his son deer hunting in werewolf-infested woods. Grady lectures Blake on the fragility of life, teaching tough love survival skills as a means of prolonging it. Viewers might reasonably expect those to come in handy later, though of course, Blake is the one destined to become the beast. If anything, the initial takeaway is that Grady was too harsh, and Blake is determined to be a better dad, which explains his suggestion to relocate the beloved Lovells to his remote family home, where his wife, Charlotte, Julia Garner, is the one who must think quickly under pressure. That protective instinct is not an especially compelling hook for a big studio horror movie. Flawed characters tend to be more effective, but it does give the film a tragic dimension that connects it back to the iconic Universal classic. In the 1941 original, Lon Chaney Jr. beautifully captured the agony of a man cursed, through no fault of his own, to be a danger to the one he loves. In both films, a selfless attempt to defend others results in the bite or scratch that turns a decent man into a monster, though the remake compresses that agony into a single night as the full moon takes effect. Both intellectually and emotionally, there's something promising afoot, and yet Whannell doesn't go far enough. Whereas The Invisible Man grabbed audiences from the opening scene, using psychology to enhance the threat, the fate of the relatively thin Wolfman feels obvious and preordained, as this model father grapples with a terrifying change that turns him against his family. Whatever its strengths or weaknesses, every werewolf movie is ultimately judged by how well it handles the transformation and creature effects, and in that department, Wolfman is a dud. Whannell opts to go the practical route, using prosthetics and other on-camera devices to simulate Blake's agonizing mutation, but errs on the side of realism, with its infected father sweating up a storm before gnawing his arm with those sharp new canines of his. Both Abbott and Garner are strong enough actors to have kept Blake's emotional journey genuine, even if the film had embraced a more fantastical look. Instead, Wolfman tries to put the audience in Blake's place, even going so far as to shift perspectives between what Charlotte sees, her husband getting swollen and feverish, and Blake's evolving POV. That eerie, almost infrared wolf vision and the distorted audio that accompanies it must have been tricky to pull off, but doesn't add anything that Abbott's performance doesn't already convey. If anything, it lends the film a gimmicky and slightly retro quality. Technically, Wolfman operates in the opposite way from The Invisible Man, where any shot could conceivably include the eponymous Psycho, leaving audiences to scan every frame for signs of him. Meanwhile, Wolfman works best when its monsters are on screen, and for this reason, the film's assorted werewolves needed to appear more intimidating. That puts a heavy burden on sound designers P.K. Hooker and Will Files, whose intrusive mix of creepy noises is often indistinguishable from Benjamin Wallfish's discordant score. In terms of scares, there aren't many, and nearly all of them are given away by the film's trailer. Rather than spoiling anything more, suffice to say that Wolfman traps its three-person family unit in an isolated location, where a werewolf tries to huff and puff his way in while one of their number mutates indoors. The battle between these two beasts is something to see, but the rest is too drawn out and inevitable, as Blake endures the sad fate of so many zombie movies. Seeing a loved one turn dangerous before your eyes. Whannell and Tuck tighten the focus on family tensions by removing most of the narrative externals, homing in on a seemingly mismatched couple's fragile relationship as husband Blake, Abbott, undergoes alarming changes and his wife Charlotte Garner is forced to make split-second decisions to protect herself and their young daughter, Ginger, Matilda Firth. Setting the primary action over the course of a single harrowing, misty night was a smart choice. The actors keep us invested in their fates for the duration, even if the script is psychologically a little thin. There's nothing to match the nerve-rattling foundation of domestic abuse that made the Invisible Man remake so chilling. Even so, it's gripping enough, a mid rather than top-tier Blumhouse entry, bolstered by regular Whannell DP Stefan Duccio's whirling camera and disorienting angles, by a juddering soundscape of elemental menace, and a bowel-churning orchestral score by Benjamin Wallfish, which is its own kind of savage beast. It also helps that the emphasis is on practical effects, not CG. Blake's inner demons are planted in a prologue during which we meet him as a preteen boy, Zac Chandler. He's hauled out of bed to go hunting with his hard-ass militaristic father Grady, Sam Jaeger, whose bellowing about trying to keep his son safe is almost as frightening as the growling beast that appears to be stalking them. They scramble up a tree into a rickety-looking deer blind to hide, but the still unseen creature gets nightmarishly close, leaving behind a massive claw mark gouged into the structure's door. 30 years later, Blake is a writer between jobs, married to Charlotte and living in San Francisco, where she has become increasingly focused on her career as a journalist. That means Blake spends far more time with precocious Ginger than her mother, making Charlotte feel like the outsider. When Blake receives legal confirmation from Oregon state officials that the long-missing and even longer estranged father he grew up fearing is dead, he suggests that Charlotte and Ginger travel there with him while he packs up the family farmhouse. Charlotte is hesitant, but Blake reasons that the breathtaking view from the valley near where he grew up will help heal their frayed relationship. Driving in the dark after getting lost, Blake is startled by the sudden appearance of a figure standing upright in the headlight beams, causing him to veer off the road and crash the rented moving truck. Panicked by the sounds of a savage predator and by evidence of the carnage it can wreak, the three of them run for the house, barely making it through the door as the creature closes in on them. Whannell again limits our view of it to a fast-moving blur in the background. Charlotte and Ginger are understandably petrified, but their fear turns to anxiety when they discover a deep gash in Blake's arm. He soon begins showing signs of some kind of feverish illness, visible in his eyes and skin and teeth, but also in his heightened senses. In one nail-biting sequence, what sounds to him like the thudding paws of a large animal scrambling over the roof turns out to be something much harder to imagine. With no phone service to contact the outside world, the family is stuck there, sheltering from the predator outside as Blake's gnarly physical transformation progresses right in front of them. Gradually, he loses the ability to speak, no longer able to communicate with or understand his wife and daughter. When he starts biting great chunks out of his own wounded arm, they really get scared. Playing a damaged man, Abbott excels at brooding intensity, but also at the softer side of someone emotionally scarred by an awful childhood. He throws himself with agonized physicality and mental suffering into the half-man, half-beast spiral, as Blake, continually adding new layers of prosthetics, struggles to reconcile the urge for blood with lingering feelings in his addled mind for his family. The one cheesy element is something the filmmakers call wolf vision, allowing us to see Charlotte and Ginger through Blake's eyes as unfamiliar figures outlined in a luminescent haze. The effect looks cheap, making you wonder if the burgeoning werewolf has had its retinas seared by too much glitchy video. Even with some missteps and underwhelming dialogue, tension remains mostly high, especially once Blake's protective instincts resurface long enough to help them fend off the original threat, involving a surprise revelation that many will see coming. Only when that conflict gets close does Whannell give us a good look at the creature in one of several amped-up jump scares. Garner's character initially seems underwritten, but she becomes more compelling once quick-thinking, resourceful Charlotte is forced to fight, and there are affecting suggestions of her rediscovering her love for her husband just as he's slipping out of her reach. Firth does a good job in a standard child in peril role, and she's touching as Ginger struggles with the conviction that the dad she adores is still in there somewhere. Whannell has cited pre-CG 1980s horror as influences, namely David Cronenberg's The Fly and John Carpenter's The Thing, discernible in shape-shifting scenes as Blake's bones crunch and contort and his skeleton changes. Anyone who goes back long enough to remember the eye-opening thrills at the time of the visceral transformations in Joe Dante's The Howling, or John Landis's An American Werewolf in London, Rob Bottin and Rick Baker really were groundbreaking effects wizards back in 1981, might judge the latest iteration to be low on fresh juice. It can't just be me who finds terrorized nuclear families a tad bland. But there's nonetheless something inherently satisfying about the classic monster tales, and Whannell has enough of a handle on primal fears to keep Wolfman entertaining. Besides, if you've ever doubted that an animal really could chew off its own limb to escape a trap, you'll wonder no more fear. For diehards, no horror movie can be too scary, but for you, a wimp, the wrong one, can leave you miserable. Never fear, scaredies, because Slate's Scaredy Scale is here to help. We've put together a highly scientific and mostly spoiler-free system for rating new horror movies, comparing them with classics along a 10-point scale. And because not everyone is scared by the same things, some viewers can't stand jump scares, while others are haunted by more psychological terrors or can't stomach arterial spurts. It breaks down each movie's scares across 3 criteria: suspense, spookiness, and gore. Horror virtuoso Leigh Whannell, screenwriter of the original Saw and writer-director of The Invisible Man, gets into an awful mess with this fundamentally muddled and unsatisfying attempt at reviving the Wolfman from Universal Studios' Monster Stable as part of a possible integrated franchise series, the first since Benicio del Toro found the cheek whiskers and lupine dodgy teeth sprouting at the first touch of moonlight back in 2010. There's an excellent opening prologue sequence and a very smart final shot, but everything between is silly, misjudged, and dull with dud storytelling, middling prosthetics, and wide-eyed I'm scared reaction acting that will have you checking the time on your phone. Christopher Abbott plays Blake, a failed writer and successful dad and house husband, living in New York with adorable daughter Ginger, Matilda Firth, and workaholic journalist breadwinner Charlotte, Julia Garner. Blake is haunted by childhood memories of being brought up in remote Oregon by his angry and emotionally cold single father, Sam Jaeger. The film sports half-heartedly with Wolfmanus being a metaphor for toxic masculinity and abusive fatherhood. A flashback reveals how the pair were hunting in the woods one day and menaced by a creature that Blake's dad gruffly assures his son was a bear. When grown-up Blake inherits his dad's creepy old Andrew Wyeth farmstead, he suggests to Charlotte that they all go on a family trip out there together as a bonding experience. Hugely bad idea. At the outset, the script squanders the fear potential of a local guy they meet in the woods, played by Benedict Hardy, who claims to remember Blake as a boy. Surely his character is going to develop interestingly and unsettlingly? No. We are simply plunged into a scary world with all the reality of a video game, in which there is a wolfman out there, but also the possibility of being infected, zombie-ishly, through a bite or scratch. This would create another wolfman, and therefore a self-canceling wolfman versus wolfman situation, but with neither wolfman being compellingly evil or fascinatingly good. The transformation scenes are passable, including time-honored fingernail detachment moments, but far inferior to comparable scenes devised long ago by John Landis or David Cronenberg. Those estimable performers Garner and Abbott look exposed by a film project that simply feels rushed and undeveloped. Sunday AM right through. Not counting the 2021 pandemic year when all theaters were closed, it's the second lowest MLK 4-day weekend of the last 10 years, with the marketplace now estimated to do $96.3 million. The last time it was this low was 2022 with $85 million, and that's when Paramount Spyglass's Scream led with a $33.8 Friday-Monday opening. Pin that overall low weekend total for all movies back then to a lack of product, even though Spider-Man No Way Home was second with $24.2 million and some COVID jitters. You can't complain and say people don't go to movies over MLK weekend. There's just nothing they're craving to see this year. The MLK 4-day weekend with the right movies has the power to do $200 plus. 2020, led by Bad Boys for Life, amassed an overall weekend total of $205.3 million, while 2015 remains the holiday's record for the entire marketplace at $250.8 million. That's when Clint Eastwood's highest-grossing movie, American Sniper, was number one, with a wide break of $107.2 million, still the wide-opening record for the holiday frame. Okay. So one of them days start here is higher than the tracking of 8 ming to 10 ming dollars, but these excellent exits should be creating more of a stampede. The hope by the Culver City lot is that more audiences will find their way to the movie. The marketing campaign clearly didn't create electricity. However, one of them days apparently has wowed in early screenings. Once audiences are inside, they have a great ride. Women are giving it 93% on post-track, while women under 25 are rolling in the aisles with a 97% grade. Sony wants to return audiences to cinemas for genres that were lost to streaming, a la rom-coms and comedies. The Jennifer Lawrence R-rated comedy opened in the summer of 2023 to $15 million over 3 days and reached 50.4 million. The difference here between One of Them Days and Sony's rom-com sleeper Anyone But You is that the latter had the Christmas-New Year's bump a year ago. At least we can understand that sour exits C are to blame for the lower-than-expected opening for Blumhouse Universal's lackluster Wolfman at $12 million over 4 days. I mean, the 1994 Jack Nicholson-Michelle Pfeiffer Wolfman movie, Wolf, opened to more money unadjusted for inflation with $17.9. That was a Mike Nichols-directed movie. One of Them Days is drawing a 69% female audience that's 46% Black, 24% Latino and Hispanic, 22% Caucasian, and 4% Asian. The 25 to 34-year-old set is the biggest demo at 41%, followed by 18 to 24 at 30%, and 25% of the audience over 35. One of Them Days is playing best in the West, South Central, South and East, with LA's AMC Grove 14, the top venue in the nation to date, with north of 36K. Wolfman is no ape. Ape Man, as the Kinks would say, with audiences on post-track giving the R-rated horror pick 54% positive and a very low 34% definite recommend. Yikes. Mostly men here at 60%, with the largest demo being 25 to 34 at 38% and 24% between 18 to 24. Diversity demos are 47% Caucasian, 29% Latino and Hispanic, 12% Black, 8% Asian, and 4% Native American other. IMAX and PLFs are driving 41% of the weekend, but clearly it's not giving this Leigh Whannell-directed movie more testosterone. IMAX says stateside screens grossed $1.55. Best markets for Wolfman are West, South Central, and Mountain areas, with the AMC Burbank 30 the best cinema so far for the pick with 30K. Universal and Blumhouse's Wolfman reboot has made $1.4 million in Thursday previews so far. As it opens this weekend, it faces off against Sony's comedy One of Them Days, which made $1.3 million in previews. Wolfman, helmed by The Invisible Man, director Leigh Whannell, and starring Christopher Abbott, is expected to prevail and make $17 million to $21 million in its opening weekend over the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday weekend. One of Them Days, an R-rated comedy with Keke Palmer and Eza in her acting debut, is on track for $8 million to $13 million between Friday to Monday. Universal is going back into its library of classic monsters with Wolfman, after Whannell's The Invisible Man reboot succeed with a $28.2 million opening after making $1.65 million in previews. The 2020 horror film ended up making $143 million worldwide. Wolfman only cost $25 million, so it should be able to scare up a profit at the box office. In addition to Abbott, Ozark star Julia Garner stars as the terrorized wife of a man turning into a lycanthrope. One of Them Days, a rare theatrical comedy, stars Palmer and Grammy winner CA as two best friends who go to outrageous lengths to scrounge up enough rent money to avoid eviction. It's produced by Issa Rae and also stars Cat Williams, Janelle James, Maud Apatow, and more. Macro Film Studios co-financed the film, and it only cost $14 million to produce, setting an easy bar for success. Universal and Blumhouse's Wolfman reboot and the Keke Palmer-led comedy One of Them Days will contend for the top slot on box office charts over the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday weekend. Regardless of which lands in first, neither are expected to break out in what's shaping up to be another quiet weekend for North American cinemas. Wolfman is poised to open to $17 million to $21 million from thirds and 300 venues over the 4-day frame, while One of Them Days looks to collect $8 million to $13 million from 2,650 theaters between Friday and Monday. Universal and Sony each canceled the premieres of Wolfman and One of Them Days due to the fires and extreme winds in Los Angeles. In terms of movie-going, though, attendance doesn't appear to be affected by the devastating wildfires that continued to ravage parts of Los Angeles, one of the biggest theatrical markets in the country. Los Angeles represented 8% of the domestic market share over the weekend, compared to the 7.8% frame prior to the outbreak, while AMC's in Century City, Burbank, and The Grove, as well as Regal Irvine, were among the top-grossing locations in the United States. Business was down roughly 50%, however, in venues closer to the fire outbreaks, such as AMC Americana Glendale, AMC Universal City Walk, and AMC Santa Anita Arcadia. Christopher Abbott stars in Wolfman, director Leigh Whannell's new take on the 1941 film about a man who gets bitten by a mysterious predator and begins to transform into a dangerous creature that soon jeopardizes the lives of his family. Ryan Gosling was originally attached to lead the film with director Derek Cianfrance, but they both departed the project in 2023, reportedly due to scheduling conflicts. Reviews for Wolfman are currently under embargo, and although horror tends to be critic-proof at the box office, 2024 was mostly disappointing for scary movies. So Wolfman can't rely on enduring love for horror to become a sleeper hit. Audiences need to actually like Wolfman, too. Wolfman is part of Universal's continued attempt to mine its vast catalog of classic monsters. After the studio's efforts to create an interconnected dark universe, flamed out with Tom Cruise's 2017 box office disaster, The Mummy, Universal has opted to focus on lower-budget, director-driven standalone features, albeit to mixed results. Whannell's The Invisible Man, starring Elizabeth Moss, was a success with $143 million worldwide in 2020. Yet Renfield, with Nicolas Cage as Dracula and Nicholas Hoult as his unhinged henchman, majorly misfired with $26 million globally in 2023. A Creature from the Black Lagoon remake from Aquaman director James Wan will be the studio's next stab at a monster revival. Wolfman cost $25 million, a fraction of the $150 million plus the studio had shelled out years ago for The Mummy. One of Them Days should function as counter-programming to Wolfman. The R-rated buddy comedy, starring Palmer and Grammy-winning musician Zay in her feature film debut, follows two roommates who race against the clock to avoid eviction after one of their boyfriends steals their rent money. Issa Rae was a producer on the film, which was directed by Lawrence Lamont and written by Insecure and Rap Shit alum Sarita Singleton. Theatrical comedies have become a dying breed. Sony's No Hard Feelings, led by Jennifer Lawrence, managed to draw crowds, but others like Neon's Babes with Alana Glazer of Broad City fame, or Amazon MGM's My Old Ass and Bottoms, starring the Bear breakout Ayo Edebiri, struggled to sell tickets despite positive reviews. So Sony kept costs low, spending an economical $14 million to produce One of Them Days with co-financier Macro Film Studios. The Elizabeth Moss-led sci-fi thriller was the last hit movie before COVID forever altered the entertainment industry and world alike, having grossed nearly $140 million against a $7 million budget. Whannell's victory lap may have been cut short as the U.S. population retreated inside during his film's third week of release. But between The Invisible Man and his 2018 cult gem Upgrade, the Australian native officially reinvented himself as a must-see genre specialist, shedding his long-established identity as one of the Saw guys and one half of Whannell. As the pandemic became more and more prolonged, Whannell and his co-writer wife Corbett decided to channel their collectively challenging experience into Wolfman, which is now another modern reimagining of a classic Universal monster a la The Invisible Man. The horror film chronicles Blake, Christopher Abbott, Charlotte, Julia Garner, and Ginger, Matilda Firth, Lovell's temporary relocation to Blake's abandoned childhood farm in the Oregon boonies for the sake of reconnecting with one another. But before their moving truck could safely arrive at the Lovell property, the family is attacked by a creature with human and animal characteristics. During the ruckus, Blake is gashed by the beast, beginning his accelerated transformation and degeneration into a wolfman. The film has a number of key themes, but Blake's sudden, fast-acting disease is meant to resemble the helpless feeling of watching a loved one disintegrate before our very eyes. I had a close personal friend who died of ALS. It was a long journey that she had with it, and it was a slow-motion nightmare. This all took place over many years, and it was tragic and horrific, Whannell tells The Hollywood Reporter. So I wanted people to draw the connection between what Blake's going through and real-world disease. Whannell's fourth directorial outing begins during Blake's childhood in 1995, as his survivalist father, Sam Jaeger, raises him in soldierly fashion. This section of the film also once contained a scene that introduced Blake's ALS-stricken mother. The character was meant to be a nod to the friend that the Whannell family lost, while creating an early parallel to the affliction that Blake suffers upon his return home in 2025. That's definitely one that hurt when I took it out. And I hope that people don't come away from Wolfman with less of an understanding of what it is really about, because I took that scene out, Whannell shares. I hope that people still receive the idea that this is about illness and losing someone you love to illness and not being able to talk to them anymore. So maybe that scene would have hammered that theme home with a sledgehammer, or at least made a finer point on it. In December 2022, Jason Blum and James Wan, in a THR interview with yours truly, stated that once their Blumhouse Atomic Monster merger was complete, they'd explore a potential sequel to Whannell's The Invisible Man. After all, the film's ending organically set up an Invisible Woman movie, as Elizabeth Moss's Cecilia used an invisibility suit to disguise the murder of her abuser as suicide. She then exits his home with the invisibility suit in hand, feeling free and empowered for the first time in ages, and one can easily imagine a scenario where she'd act as a vigilante in order to provide that same type of freedom to other women in abusive relationships they can't escape. However, Whannell is so content with Invisible Man's ending and what it leaves to the imagination that he's opting not to pursue another chapter. That said, as the writer who launched a 10-plus movie franchise in Saw and a 5-plus movie franchise in Insidious, he keenly understands that the studio may still proceed with an Invisible Man sequel at some point. I can't imagine gluing more story onto a string. I was so happy with Invisible Man's ending that I just don't feel the artistic need to go forward with it, Whannell admits. The studio might look at that and say, well, we feel like it should keep going because we want to make more money. But on an artistic level, I'm like, that's a nice closed door there. Let's just leave it closed. Below, during a recent conversation with THR, Whannell also discusses why he once left Wolfman at a time when Ryan Gosling was attached as the title character. He then offers some more heartbreaking news for anyone holding out hope for an Upgrade sequel. They did. It's interesting what ends up setting a film back. The industry can be quite chaotic at times. The old William Goldman adage, "Nobody knows anything," applies to far more than screenwriting. It's really just people throwing mud at the wall and seeing what sticks, especially post-pandemic. All the turbulence that happened in the film industry, where movie theaters suddenly weren't a thing and streaming got ramped up, these things can alter a career in ways that you never saw coming. So the strikes definitely ended up delaying this film a bit, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, it's been 5 years since Invisible Man came out. How did that happen? Yeah, there's not much more to it. I was working with Ryan Gosling initially. He was attached to Star, and we were developing it. Then there were scheduling issues, so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to move on to another project. And then it suddenly came back around, which I was happy about because I was able to continue with the script that I had already written. I was able to just pick it right up. Ryan, unfortunately, because of his schedule, wasn't able to continue, but it was definitely a twistier road than I've taken in the past. In the case of Upgrade and Invisible Man, it was ABC. It was very linear. Write the movie, look for financiers, find the cast, shoot the film. So this was definitely the most winding road to making a film, but I'm so happy that I got to make it. Did Chris Abbott's Goat and Poor Things point you in his direction? It didn't. I actually saw Poor Things in New Zealand while we were in pre-production. Stefan Duccio and I went to a great little theater in Wellington, and that was after Chris had been cast in Wolfman. I was well aware of his work, and he was actually the very first actor I talked to for Wolfman. We had a Zoom call and chatted about it, and I was a fan of his. But the thing that actually pushed me over the edge and made me realize that it has to be Chris was seeing him do an off-Broadway play with Aubrey Plaza. The next night after I saw him, he shattered his kneecap on stage, and he had to do the rest of the play on crutches. But as luck would have it, that two-hander works fine with the character on crutches. It's so crazed. But it was this rainy night in the West Village of Manhattan, and I ran into the theater after I had just flown there. I got there with seconds to spare before the curtain went up, and Chris's energy was so powerful on stage. When you're actually in the room with someone, you can reach people with your energy in a more powerful way than you can in a movie. So I walked out of there and wrote a long email to everyone at Universal and Jason Blum saying we have to cast Chris. So it was really that play, Carrie, that did it. It actually wasn't. I would say it was inspired by the pandemic lockdown. COVID really pushed a lot of the things that were in the script. It was such an uncertain time. I had 3 young children, and my wife and I tried to entertain them, but they couldn't leave the house. They were also so young that they didn't understand why, and I somehow felt like I was failing as a parent during that time. Everybody else is getting pandemic parenting right, and I'm the one getting it wrong. So it was just such a strange time of uncertainty, and my wife Corbett Tuck and I ended up pouring that into the Wolfman script. And one of the things that people talked about at that time was relocating. I had a lot of friends who just up and moved out of Los Angeles. One couple that's very close to us moved to Oregon, and my wife and I then had the conversation, should we be living on a farm? So it was very discombobulating, and that's really what caused me to write that relocation into the film. Frankenstein stories explore the risks when man plays God, creating life and facing the consequences. Blumhouse shrewd 2020 reboot of the classic Universal horror film. The Invisible Man cleverly played off the latter too. As Elizabeth, Moss embodied a woman trying to escape an abusive relationship with a mad scientist, directed by Leigh Whannell. The low-budget thriller was so successful that Universal rushed to adapt other titles from its classic monsters catalog, imagining a dark universe series that would update and eventually connect them. All somewhere along the way, the momentum stalled, and what had first been floated as a Ryan Gosling reinvention of Wolfman now arrives in a slow, soulful, and not especially scary form, starring Christopher Abbott in the title role. Joel stepped into helm after Gosling, and director Derek Sander left the project in various ways. Abbott may actually be a more interesting candidate to play a man wrestling with his inner anger as the actor who has gravitated to tortured characters in such twisted projects as James White, Piercing, and Possessor. Wolfman Abbott is a decent guy and devoted dad, though he's clearly worried about a temper that flares up from time to time, at one point apologizing to his daughter Ginger Matilda Futh for scaring her. He comes right out and says, sometimes when you're a daddy, you're so afraid of your kids getting scars that you become the thing that scars them. It's an astute line, well suited to a sensitive generation's more self-aware approach to parenting, and yet it so blatantly articulates the film's big idea that it might have been nice to let audiences reach that conclusion on their own. The screenplay, which bears the mark of both Whannell and Insidious writer Corbett, Tuck opens with a memory from Blake's childhood 3 decades earlier. The boy, played by Zac Chandler, a good match for Abbott, was raised in a Sylvan Mountain farmhouse by a traumatically stern Father Grady Sam Jaeger, who takes his son deer hunting in werewolf-infested woods. Grady lectures Blake on the fragility of life, teaching tough love survival skills as a engine. Viewers might reasonably expect those to come in handy later, though, of course. Blake is the one destined to become the beast. If anything, the initial takeaway is that Grady was too harsh, and Blake is determined to be a better dad, which explains his suggestion to relocate the beloved Levels to his remote family home, where his wife Charlotte Julia Garner is the one who must think quickly. Under pressure, that protective instinct is not an especially compelling hook for a big studio horror movie. Flawed characters tend to be more effective, but it does give the film a tragic dimension that connects it back to the iconic Universal classic in the 1941 original Lon Chaney. Jr. beautifully captured the agony of a man cursed through no fault of his own to be a danger to the one he loves in. Both films, a selfless attempt to defend others, results in the bite or scratch that turns a decent man into a monster. Though the remake compresses that agony into a single night as the full moon takes effect, both intellectually and emotionally, there's something promising afoot, and yet Whannell doesn't go far enough. Whereas The Invisible Man grabbed audiences from the opening scene using psychology to enhance the threat, the fate of the relatively thin Wolfman feels obvious and preordained as this model father grapples with a terrifying change that turns him against his family. Whatever its strengths or weaknesses, every werewolf movie is ultimately judged by how well it handles the transformation and creature effects, and in that department, Wolfman is a dud. Whannell opts to go the practical route, using prosthetics and other on-camera devices to simulate Blake's agonizing mutation, but errs on the side of realism with its infected father sweating up a storm before gnawing his arm with those sharp new canines of his. Both Abbott and Garner are strong and enough actors to have kept Blake's emotional journey genuine, even if the film had embraced a more fantastical look. Instead, Wolfman tries to put the audience in Blake's place, even going so far as to shift perspectives between what Charlotte sees, her husband getting swollen and feverish, and Blake's evolving POV. That eerie, almost infrared wolf vision and the distorted audio that accompanies it must have been tricky to pull off, but doesn't add anything that Abbott's performance doesn't already convey. If anything, it lends the film a gimmicky and slightly retro quality. Technically, Wolfman operates in the opposite way from The Invisible Man, where any shot could conceivably include the Aonomysico, leaving audiences to scan every frame for signs of him. Meanwhile, Wolfman works best when its monsters are on screen. And for this reason, the film's assorted werewolves needed to appear. More intimidating, that puts a heavy burden on sound designers PK Hook ER and Will Files, whose intrusive mix of creepy noises is often indistinguishable from Benjamin Wallfish's Discord and score. In terms of scares, there aren't many, and nearly all of them are given away by the film's trailer rather than spoiling anything. More suffice to say that Wolfman traps its three-person family unit in an isolated location where a werewolf tries to huff and puff his way in while one of their number mutates indoors. The battle between these two beasts is something to see, but the rest is too drawn out and inevitable as Blake endures the sad fate of so many zombie movies, seeing a loved one turn dangerous before your eyes, trapped inside the suffering father's head. Wolfman wants to say something about the fear of inheriting aggression or mental illness from our parents, perhaps, but winds up making him pathetic in the process when we look back on this period of Hollywood movies and decide which reboots and remakes actually deserve to come with us. Leigh Whannell, The Invisible Man, should be among them, after Universal's attempted cinematic universe was DOA. The 2020 horror film showed the classic monsters had more to offer than brand recognition by finding something about the 1933 original that spoke to today and mining it for well-executed scares. I remember it as the kind of movie I was telling friends they had to see as soon as I left the theater. 5 years later, Wan's back with another Universal Monsters adaptation, Wolfman. Like his previous film, it the classic story to the present day and dramatically reimagines it, though the transition isn't quite as smooth. It's tense and fun, flecked with creative touches that show what this filmmaker can do when armed with a high-concept horror premise, but it lacks its predecessor's thematic clarity, and therefore its staying power if The Invisible Man was a clear step forward. From Upgrade Duo's 2018 techno-thriller, then Wolfman is at best a lateral move. The film opens in 1990s Oregon, where we meet a father and son living in relative isolation in the wilderness. What we see of their life is strictly managed. The survivalist father seems obsessed with protecting his son from the dangers of the world, while the boy seems to fear nothing more than his own dad. The kid grows up to be Blake Christopher Abbott. Our protagonist one day, while out hunting in the surrounding woods, young Blake catches a glimpse of something very werewolf. Why, in his scope, he and his father are briefly pursued, but take refuge in a deer stand and survive. without coming face to face with this strange beast. Though Blake's father tries to hide it from him, he believes this was a hiker lost not long ago who supposedly came down with some mysterious illness, a condition we're told is known to local Native Americans as the face of the wolf, and he's determined to hunt him down. This prologue sets the table in more ways than one. Whannell has given us the language to understand what he's doing with the titular monster. Toxic male protectiveness emerges as the central metaphor, but he's also carved out a unique place for his film in the werewolf tradition. And since Wolfman isn't interested in being a lore textbook, it works fast. This werewolf is clearly the bipedal variety of its source, leaning more mans than wolf, and the daytime encounter rules out the full moon as a factor. This change is neither cyclical nor temporary. When they reach the cabin, Blake secured it from the beast on the outside, but we know it's only a matter of time before he himself becomes the threat. When we flash forward to present-day New York City, Blake has long severed ties with his father. He's married to Charlotte Julia Garner, a journalist, and is mostly a stay-at-home dad to their daughter, Ginger Matilda. Blake and his daughter have a close, loving relationship, though his childhood has left its scars. He's as afraid of frightening her as he is afraid for her. His marriage, meanwhile, is on the rocks. There's love there, but he and Charlotte are finding it harder and harder to communicate. When the story properly begins, the stage is set for tragedy. Blake gets a letter confirming his father, long missing, is now officially presumed dead. He sells his family on a summer in Oregon, going through his father's things, showing them the childhood home he hasn't seen in years. An attack leaves them shaken and him scratched when they reach the cabin. Blake secures it from the beast on the outside, but we know it's only a matter of time before he himself becomes the threat from here. There are two movies in Wolfman that are worth considering separately. Guano's film is a creature feature, and the first question of many moviegoers will be whether it delivers on that thrill ride. I'd say it does. The Further, don't go in expecting The Fly or An American Werewolf in London, though. The Werewolf Howl is a clear nod to the latter. The movie's real value in this realm comes in the portrayal of Blake's perspective, which we check in with periodically as he changes Guano's films. Display a talent for creatively deploying form to reflect content, and what he chooses to do with visual and sound design in these moments is honestly really cool. Couple those touches with a quickly disconcerting physical performance from Abbott, and you have this movie's interesting contribution to the werewolf canon. Garner's performance is the heart of this, and if the movie were told entirely through her eyes, I think you'd have the compelling layer of doubt that the film sometimes seems to want underneath all that genre work. You have the drama. Blake's transformation is a supernatural rendering of his parental instincts turning harmful. It's no coincidence that his family's scenic drive to the Oregon cabin visually echoes the Torrent family's journey to the Overlook in the Knopf, shining a compelling idea, certainly, and a strong framework for a reimagined werewolf story, but it could have been, and perhaps should have been, taken much further. Wolfman ultimately has a pretty soft heart. Blake is firmly a tragic figure, and the character drama that works best is when we can tell that all three characters are conscious of the divide forming between them, but still unable to prevent it. Garner's performance is the heart of this. And if the movie were told entirely through her eyes, I think you'd have the compelling layer of doubt that the film sometimes seems to want. But Blake never has the well-intentioned insidiousness that we sense in his father. In the prologue, this is, I believe, an issue of alignment. Part of what makes The Shining so frightening is that even with the ghosts and the alcohol, Jack's growing evil feels intrinsic. This is supposed to be the potency of the werewolf metaphor in Wolfman 2. But even if Blake's body is changing, his lycanthropy always feels like an external force. The more thematically compelling version would take place entirely in the prologue with Blake's father, the one seeing his paternalism metastasize, as it is the B. Metaphor is an imperfect fit, and any emotional bite doesn't leave much of a mark. More detail, maybe it's just me, but lately there seems to have been an influx of werewolf movies. This seems especially true over the past few years. Now here we are, we in January, and we already have our first one of the year. It's Wolfman, a Blumhouse reboot of the 1941 L. Chaney horror classic The Wolfman. This latest iteration is helmed by Leigh Whannell, who impressed with 2020 Superb's The Invisible Man, written by Whannell and his wife Corbett. Tuck Wolfman takes a dark and gory look at a centerpiece. The story deals with such subjects as family, parenthood, troubled pasts, and clinging to one's humanity. Interestingly and somewhat disappointingly, there's very little in terms of mythology or folklore. More on that in a second. Christopher Abbott plays Blake Lovell, a writer and stay-at-home dad who lives in New York City with his wife, Charlotte Julia, Garner, and their young daughter, Ginger Matilda Fifth Blake, and Ginger, and very close despite his tendency of being overprotective. But his relationship with Charlotte isn't as strong. She pours a lot of time into her job as a journalist, and not only has it come between her and her husband, but it has also left her feeling disconnected from Ginger. One day, Blake is notified that his estranged father, Grady Sam Jaeger, has officially been declared dead by the state of Oregon after being missing for a long time. Grady was a survivalist living in an isolated farmhouse deep in the Oregon wilderness. Blake left that life as soon as he was old enough, and he hadn't spoken to his father since. Now his father's home place has fallen to him, and he needs to make a trip out west to pack up his dad's things, realizing their need of some family time. Agrees to go with Blake to Oregon, with hopes it will bring her closer to her husband and daughter. But it doesn't take long for things to go bad, less than a mile away from his father's place. Blake swerves to avoid a strange figure, standing in the middle of the road, causing him to wreck their moving truck as they climb out of the wreckage. A creature suddenly attacks, clawing Blake across the arm. Before they're able to run away into the night, the family makes it to Blake's father's house and lock themselves inside while the creature prowls outside, looking for a way in from. Their Wolfman turns into a story of survival that takes place over the course of that one harrowing night. As its title suggests, the creature is indeed a wolfman, and it quickly becomes obvious that Blake is infected with whatever animal-borne disease it is carrying. His symptoms start light, but quickly turn more grotesque as he begins to change right before his frightened family's eyes. The movie chronicles the fame's fight to survive the night, not only from the creature outside the house, but also the one within, though not as metaphorically rich as The Invisible Man. There is still plenty of symbolism in the material. The rest is just good old genre fun. The baked-in tension is accompanied by a healthy amount of gore, which fits well with the creature's ravenous brutality. And then there's Blake's painful transformation, which is captured practically through the prosthetics and makeup wizardry of effects designer Arian Teuton. Again, there's no traditional Wolfman mythology to speak of. There is no full moon, no silver bullets, no fur-covered body. In fact, there's not much information at all. Outside of some brief and scant opening script, the film's infection angle has its benefits, but it can also seem like a shortcut which, for better or worse, allows Whannell to focus on other things. Overall, it works, but it would have been nice to have a little more background into something so primally and terrifyingly transformative, as is often the case with so many movies like this. Not all of the character choices make sense in Wolfman. Some are downright baffling, yet we still find ourselves invested in this family's plight, partly due to Whannell never letting us lose sight of their familial bond. It's also aided by great performances from Abbott, Garner, and Futh. And though most of it takes place in the dark of night, we still get some stunning Oregon scenery that helps create an isolated setting that's both beautiful and forbidding as it is. Wolfman doesn't break the mold, but it doesn't exactly embrace it either. It lands somewhere in between, working best as pure genre entertainment with a few compelling themes on its mind. It's not a movie that will stick in your memory, but it's well made and noticeably better than the slew of recent werewolf movies that have come our way. Wolfman is now showing exclusively in theaters when it now was released in early 2020. it was hard not to view Lejuo's re-envisioning of the Invisible Man as the anti-Fef franchise picture at a time when shared cinematic universes were all the rage. Invisible Man was steadfastly self-contained, not coincidentally Universal's attempt to create a dark universe of action pictures featuring their classic movie monsters had blown up on the runway 3 years earlier. Whannell's Invisible Man dropped all but the name and core concept of the original film and novel, instead reimagining the character as a sociopathic tech CEO who uses an optic suit to stalk and gaslight his estranged wife. Coming on the heels of the #Me Too movement, Invisible Man was a horror movie of its time and contained a career-best performance from Elizabeth Moss, to say nothing of one all-timer of a shock scare. It also blissfully spent zero time laying groundwork for any future installments or spin-offs in an age of Easter eggs and post-credits teasers. The closed ending of The Invisible Man felt like something of a miracle. Of course, it was. Also a Hollywood tentpole picture. So it was perhaps inevitable that Universal and Blumhouse would attempt to recreate its success 5 years later. Whannell has again been tapped to craft a moody reinterpretation of a Universal monster. CL Classic, Whannell's Wolfman is, to be sure, a cut above the usual January Blumhouse release, but it is never great in the way that The Invisible Man was great. And it's at its worst when it tries to be as he did with The Invisible Man. Whannell all but jettison the story of the 1941 original, transplanting the action from a Welsh village to the forests of Oregon. Blake Lovell, Christopher Abbott, receives word that his father has been legally declared dead and embarks with his wife, Charlotte Julie Garner, and young daughter Ginger Matilda, 5th, to the cabin where he was raised. Blake's father, a survivalist type, had evidently gone missing some years earlier. The death certificate is a formality, but it still dredges up Blake's conflicted feelings regarding his sometimes scary upbringing. I shouldn't need to tell you that the elder Lovell's disappearance may or may not have something to do with a local legend, which the indigenous population knows as the face of the wolf. Nor should I need to tell you that Blake and his family are immediately attacked by a mysterious hairy creature. And I certainly don't need to tell you that Blake sustains a wound in the attack, or that as the night goes on, he becomes increasingly Canaan Wolfman is at its best when it's finding new and inventive ways of presenting Blake's transformation on screen. It begins with a heightening of the senses. Blake can smell a drawer full of jerky from 2 rooms away, and a spider crawling up the wall sounds like a Neo per drum solo as his condition progresses. Hanano actually brings us inside his head to view the world as a werewolf sees it. Color is at once drained out and heightened. He can recognize his loved ones, but they look strange and monstrous, and their words come out a disturbing garble. I doubt this was Whannell's intent, but I couldn't help but think of this classic Far Side strip in the film's most rewarding conceit. Whannell flips us back and forth between Blake's point of view and Charlotte's, giving us a sort of real-time Rashomon in which one of the participants is functionally a giant dog. Had this been the main hook of Wolfman, it might have been something truly special. Unfortunately, the film can't seem to quite decide what exactly it wants to be, and there's some evidence of rewrites along the line. The one bad, night framework would seem to be an ingenious workaround of the full moon problem, which plagues most werewolf movies, for example. But it's never established whether the wolves in this film are affected by the moon in the first place, because The Invisible Man was primarily a social thriller. One senses that Whannell felt pressured to amplify the allegory here as well. In this case, the parental fear of hurting their children while trying to protect them. Unfortunately, generational trauma and lycanthropy don't snap together quite as easily as domestic abuse and invisibility. And whenever the film cycles back to those obvious beats, it's hard not to roll one's eyes. The whole thing smacks of trying to make fetch happen, which in a film about a human dog one would think would be easy. It's not, for lack of trying on the actors' parts, though Abbott captures the haunted qualities of Lon Chaney Jr., which made the original so affecting a muted sadness, which I'm sorry, I truly am, can only be described as hangdog. The scenes between Blake and his daughter are genuinely sweet, and one feels for him as he realizes how little he can do to protect her from himself. Garner, for her part, gives great, you gotta be kidding mean face and then once again proves herself to be an able final girl. Her character is a high-powered journalist at an unnamed legacy publication who mentions working on a book, and I wish the film had leaned into this aspect of her a little more with a little tweaking. One can easily imagine her as a non-nonsense Lois Lane type, using the wits she's honed in her profession to protect her against her werewolf spouse, which is the film's problem in a nutshell. It presents a lot of good ideas, but can't seem to decide which ones on which to focus in, trying ye. Too hard to recapture. The Invisible Man. Wolfman betrays the originality, which made that film so refreshing. We know that Whannell knows how to have a bloody good time. He wrote the screenplay for Saw after all, but here we find him oddly muted and constrained. There's some good meat on this picture's bones, but not quite enough for us to sink our claws into extra information. The Universal Monsters pantheon has undergone many transformations over the years, from the Dark Universe with Dra Untold to a more official beginning with the ill-fated The Mummy reboot, however, where a planned universe of Universal's most beloved horrors failed. A new iteration of standalone films was successfully able to reinvent the established lore. Leigh Whannell. The Invisible Man modernized the classic film from 1933, and its success also opened the door to his next outing. 5 years later, Wolfman follows. Blake, played by Christopher Abbott, a stay-at-home dad and part-time writer plagued by a past with his harsh father, who lived out in the Oregon mountains after learning of his father's death. He, his wife, Charlotte Julia Garner, and daughter Ginger Matilda travel to the isolated house to collect his belongings. But on the way, something attacks Blake and his family, infecting him and ushering in a new type of werewolf smile. This isn't the first time this character has been reimagined, but it's certainly the best 2010s. The Wolfman was a bloody spectacle that served as an expanded remake of 1941's The Wolfman, but was heavily lacking in the themes of death, grief, and love that made the 1941 film such a classic. In 22's Wolfman, the spectacle takes a back seat to a powerful story which proves that there's more to be scared of than a monster racking up a body count. Blake, being anxious about being like his strict and callous father, only to eventually terrify his daughter in new ways, personified the idea that all parents have of scarring their kids when all they want is to see them succeed. It's a classic sins of the father trope that is carried throughout the film, coupled with his wife Charlotte feeling distant from their daughter. The movie depicts a family that has love for one another, but is unsure of how to express it. Fear and love were also explored in The Wolfman, but never to the extent of this remake, nor in this same vein. Larry Talbot and his father were estranged, like Blake and his dad, but the ever-present fear of the people he loves being at risk because of him is far more compelling. Furthermore, Christopher Abbott perfectly captures what it's like to be a parent who is trying to protect his family while also being terrified of what's happening to him. There's a genuine fear in his eyes that's hard to miss, and the more Blake succumbs to his animal instincts, the more painful it is to watch him and his family grow more detached through necessity. All the while, the themes of death and grief follow them until the finale, when all part. Ides must accept the reality of the situation and the fact that the only way it can end is for the threat to die. Wolf Man is a horror film that will leave the audience thinking more about the choices Blake makes and how he's just an unlucky man trying to keep the people he loved as safe as possible. Wolfman does a great job of building up to the reveal of the titular monster. For fans of the original movie, there's an added surprise in that the wolf that infects Blake looks more akin to the original being that the father Blake believed was dead had actually become infected himself, growing more hair since he'd been out in the wilderness for much longer. However, this reveal only scratches the surface of what the visual effects team accomplishes for Wolfman. Like any great werewolf movie, Wolfman's success hinges on the transformation. The reboot changes the lore to focus less on a curse dictated by the full moon and more on a disease that the indigenous tribes would call its face of the wolf. From an effects standpoint, AISC Blake lose his teeth, his ability to speak, his hair, and his bodily functions. He can't hear what his family is saying, nor can he see them normally while he speaks. Fine in his mind. The reality is he talks, and grunts his evolution into something more feral is tragic, and seeing him gnaw at his wounded arm is one of the film's highlights. All of this leads to a final transformation in which the disease finally takes hold, changing Blake's skeletal structure and musculature, and revealing some great practical effects, like claws coming out through his nails, his cheekbones rising, and Blake breaking his own jaw. But the movie also could have done so much more if it had fully embraced the horror in body horror. Though there are moments that provoke disgust, like when a fully changed Blake chews off his own foot to chase his family, the transformations are far from fulfilling when compared to The Fly or even John Carpenter's The Thing. Audiences see small changes over time, like his teeth getting sharper or his jaw protruding more. But there are never any scenes devoted to these changes taking place. Furthermore, the movie's one big transformation scene is much shorter than, say, An American Werewolf in London. The movie would have benefited from a slow burn evolution in which the transformation comes in phases like a moon and gets more violent and concerning before Blake's final evolution. Wolfman's effects work wonders, but the envelope could have been pushed further to really embroil the idea that this curse is actually a disease. Wolfman may be the most divisive Universal Monsters movie yet. It's a clever story that is emotional and terrifying, thanks to its many suspense-filled scenes of being hunted, but also a case of failed potential Wolfman needs to spend far more time embracing body horror and grossing out its audience, just like it pulls them into the relatable Blake and his unfortunate situation. The closest it gets to the spectacle achieved by the Wolfman is a wolf-on-wolf fight that has the makings of a climactic final battle, but turns out to be nothing more than an elaborate plot device. In fact, it's the most distracting scene in the film, because it's the one time the movie departs from its slow burn approach to become something more bombastic instead of shock and spectacle. The film is fueled by its cast. Abbott delivers one of the best werewolf performances in decades. Conversely, Garner's scared but stoic Charlotte may fail to connect with viewers, as some of her emotional reactions work while others feel underdeveloped, creating a disjointed performance. Nevertheless, Wolfman is definitely an experience worth seeing in theaters because it's terrifying, even at its most basic level. This movie proves that the Universal Monsters reboots, even if they aren't groundbreaking entries, work best when trying something new that embraces and honors the original, considering the resounding success of director Leigh Whannell, The Invisible Man. Expectations are understandably high for his follow-up. However, perhaps it's better to put a muzzle on these expectations, as The Wolfman fails to live up to its predecessor. Not that all is bad with Universal's latest reimagining attempt, yet the feeling persists after watching that at its worst, this movie is an incomplete endeavor that ultimately falls into generic horror territory, lacking any real bite. It's a shame that Wolfman does not deliver in the most fundamental area of a true horror film. However, Hanano and writing partner Corbett do succeed in crafting a story surrounding family and the lengths they go through to support and protect each other. Blake Christopher Abbott, Charlotte Julia Garner, and their daughter Ginger Matilda decide to take a trip to the Pacific Northwest and spend time together at Blake's childhood home. The relationship between children and their parents, specifically fathers, is established early on and carries the emotional onus that pushes the film forward. Furthermore, Whannell and Corbett comment on the transformative nature of dying and how this affects families. Wolfman also depicts how generational trauma is passed down and carried from person to person. The film likens this to a contagious disease and highlights the way this disease can manifest itself despite the carrier's best intentions. Curiously, though, context is sparse for these musings. The reasoning behind the trip is discussed as an attempt to mend a supposed rift between the couple, even if there hasn't been any clear indication of that being the case. Up to that point, Wolfman also hints that Blake privately struggles with parts of his personality, yet instances depicting Blake's potential anger management issues lack any true weight. Even though clunky scenes attempt to hint at these issues, a proper exploration is severely lacking This results in a frustrating experience that ultimately doesn't do justice to its characters and irresponsibly leaves its audience to its own devices to piece together the plot. However, what Wolfman lacks in cohesion, it makes up for in sentimentality. At times, the father-daughter moments are overplayed. However, then Read My Mind, dynamic between the pair, mostly delivers effective emotional dividends. In addition, a scene where Blake confesses fears of traumatizing his daughter in his attempts to protect her resonates deeply, even if it comes across as lazy. For Abbott and F play into the relationship well, and even though Garner is given little to do, the family struggles are relatable and call for empathy. Credit also deserves to be extended for favoring practical effects over blatant CGI. This version of the classic monster has characteristics that are an obvious callback to the Wolfmen of the past, while introducing new features to the cell. Beastly entity body horror moments are too few and far in between to categorize the film as a true body horror film. But when they occur, they are definitely gnarly. The transformation is extended throughout the film's duration, accentuated by adding grotesque makeup from scene to scene. However, Wolfman does include a scene where the change happens in real time to disturbing effect. Furthermore, Abbott does an excellent job selling the physicality of the eventual transformation. Even when Wolfman fails to clearly define the metaphor, the lore is traditionally built on the actor, also succeeds in playing subtle animalistic behavior in human form, and then adversely displays sentimentality as the Wolfman from an aesthetic standpoint. Stefan Dusso's cinematography makes the most of the setting, even when most of the film occurs at night. Dacio captures intense feelings of claustrophobia, regardless of the scene's location. Benjamin Wallfish's score is effective in its eeriness as it employs shrilling sounds reminiscent of the monster's classic howl, a clever device. Highlighting what the world looks like from the Wolfman's perspective adds a unique visual element as well. Not all is bad with Wolfman, which makes its weaker points exponentially frustrating. However, Universal's dedication to reimagining its monster franchise by crafting low-budget horror focused on story still proves to be the right approach. Substance is lacking, but not enough to cause little more than a slight blip in this monster's universe. Hopefully, the next chapter will be a return to form. In the meantime, Whannell's latest attempt is at its best serviceable for now. This film, directed by Leigh, written by Whannell, Corbett Tuck, produced by Jason Blum, starring Christopher Abbott, Julia Garner, Sam Jorger, cinematography, Stefan Dacio, edited by Andy, Canny music by Benjamin Wallfish, production companies Blumhouse. Productions Cloak and Company, distributed by Universal Pictures. Release date, January 17th, 2025. Running time 103 minutes. Country, United States. Office, $1.4 million. So guys, this is the review of Wolfman movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.